Hey everybody, today I want to show you how to trim hydrangeas, and this is a topic I've covered before in quite a bit of detail. However, today I want to talk specifically to those of you who are absolutely nervous about trimming back your hydrangeas. You're convinced you're going to wreck them, you're convinced you're going to do it wrong, and I just want to assure you it's not too hard to do. There's really just 3 different ways that you can trim a hydrangea, and it depends on the variety. So most important thing is to know what variety you have. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to know what types you have. Still might have a little confusion, but hopefully this will help. So I'm going to start with a variety that's the easiest to spot, and it's the climbing hydrangea. So this one grows completely different than the other ones. It has these kind of tendril arms that kind of climb all over the place. You'll also notice that along the branches, it has these aerial roots, and those will attach to things. They're not super destructive or anything like that, but those are the telltale signs. These also have a bit of a lacy flower as well. And these are varieties that you don't have to do any trimming on. Now, it does help maybe once a year to go through and train these branches to go where you want them to, so that way it's going to fill out in the spots that you want, but otherwise you don't really have to trim unless something's growing somewhere you don't want to. Then you just snip that off, but you can do that anytime. Doesn't matter if it's fall or spring or anything like that. And then the flowers, when they're spent, if you want to cut those off, that's fine. It's up to you if you want to do that. Now, another group of hydrangeas that you don't do any trimming on are the big leaf hydrangeas. So those are the Macrophylla and the Serrata. Serrata are also called mountain hydrangeas. And those are the kind, usually you can spot them because number one, they have these big kind of plush, supple, dark leaves. So that's one indicator. They're nice and big. And then the other indicator usually is that they have blue or pink flowers. So you'll be able to spot them because they have those big flower heads, and the petals, the individual petals on them tend to be a lot bigger than some of the other hydrangeas. And a lot of times they're a little bit more spade shaped, whereas the other hydrangea types sometimes have more of a rounded shape. So that's another clue. And a lot of times, like in the other hydrangeas, the flower petals will be in kind of a cruciform shape. And these usually have a lot more overlap on them because they have these big showy flowers. Now, not all of them are going to have these really tight flower heads like this one. Some of them do have more of a lacy appearance. Other ones have really showy petals on the outside and then really tight petals on the inside. So, you know, those are things to look for. But again, they usually look pink or they look blue. However, there are a couple varieties that might trip you up because there's white varieties, white flowered varieties, and green flowered varieties. I'm thinking specifically of the Endless Summer, Blushing Bride, Grin and Tonic, Froggy. Those have a little bit different color petal, so you might suddenly not think that those fall into there, but they look, you know, very much like these, just with those different flower colors. And I say you don't have to do any trimming on those, but because they're a little bit less hardy than some of the other varieties that I'm talking about, usually in the springtime here in northern Michigan, we have a bit of dieback. So once they start to leaf out, I just go through and cut off any dead stems that are coming out and any dead flowers. And to trim back the flowers, that's all I do is go underneath the flower head and cut it off before the leaf set, because these are varieties that bloom on old wood, meaning they've produced their flowers for next year right now. Now, they often, with the newer varieties, they also will send up more flowers later on in the season, but they probably have flower buds on them right now. So if you trim them back a whole bunch, you're going to cut off those flowers, and so you don't want to do that. So avoid cutting these back, and just cut back any dead parts in the springtime. Again, this is another variety where if there's a wayward branch, just cut it off or trim it back. You can either cut the whole branch off or just part of the branch. Doesn't make a difference, but you can kind of mind those a little bit more. Now, another variety is called the oak leaf hydrangea or corsifolia, and that one's pretty easy to spot because of the leaves. So where most of these hydrangeas have just these kind of regular, little serrated leaves like this, the oak leaf hydrangeas have more lobed leaves that look, surprisingly, or not unsurprisingly, I should say, like an oak leaf. And they're really noticeable in the fall because they tend to get nice red and purple colors on them. So pretty easy to spot. The flowers on them are a little bit more lacy. They're going to actually look a little bit like this, even though this is not an oak leaf hydrangea. They tend to look like this. However, there are a couple varieties where the flower heads are a little tighter, and so they don't have this kind of lacy look to them. So those can trip you up a little bit because of that. But if you look at the leaves, you're going to know those right away. That's another one. Don't trim those back at all. You can cut off dead flowers if you want, but you don't have to. And that's one that I would also cut those flowers off. I generally think about doing it in the spring, but it's also one that is more of a zone 5 and higher type of hydrangea, so they tend to not always do well in certain areas here in northern Michigan. Now I'll talk about the 2 varieties that could benefit from some trimming every single year. First one is the Panicle hydrangea. So this one here, this is a classic limelight flower. It's cone shaped, so it has that thinner are smaller on top, wider on the bottom. Also, when the flowers are about to open, the petals tend to be more of a lime color. And then as they open up, they tend to turn a little more creamy or ivory or even white, depending on the variety. And they stay that color for quite a while, usually the month of July and August. Then when the nights start cooling down, we start seeing them get more pink and mauve and even red colors, even purple. Like this limelight really has quite a bit of purple tones in it. And it's going to depend on your area how much color you get off of them at that point. Sometimes they're going to more quickly go to more of a parchment brown color. But if you have cold nights and a good amount of moisture in the soil, they tend to get really good color. So also note, like the limelight and a lot of the other varieties have these really tight clusters of flowers. There are some varieties like this Pinky Winky that have a much lacier effect going on, and other varieties that are like this are going to be like the Quick Fire and the Early Evolution. Those are varieties that might trip you up because they, look so lacy that you think they might be a mountain hydrangea, or you might think there's something else. But you can see the shape of these is still panicle, thinner on top, bigger on the bottom. The Quick Fires are a little more ball-shaped flowers, but they do have a little bit of a point. So it's usually pretty easy to tell your panicle hydrangeas, mainly because of the color change that happens as the nights get colder. And these are pretty straightforward to cut back, and I have a pretty easy method for it, so I'm going to show you that. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I tell you about the last type of hydrangea that I want to talk about, because in case you have one of those, you trim it back a little bit differently. And the last variety that I want to talk about is the arborescent variety. So I have one down here. This one is a more dwarf variety. It's called Limetta. So the flower heads are smaller and the plant itself is smaller, but these are going to have more of those ball-shaped flowers. The petals are usually a little smaller, but there's a huge cluster of them, and they can be almost a full circle, or they're like a over dome kind of shape to them. And so they're pretty easy to spot, because if you compare them to the flower heads here, like I have one down here that I'll show you. Also, these varieties tend to be white. However, there are some pink varieties. So I'll show you some of the pink ones as well, because the pink ones might trip you up. But you can see the difference in the flower head between these two. So this one, big petals, and also keeps that pink color for a long time. These here, much smaller petals, tend to be white. If they are pink, they tend not to hold on to that pink color for a really long time. They tend to kind of shift quite quickly. So they open up. I have some examples here. This Invincible Ruby, when it first opens up, it's quite a dark pink, beautiful ruby kind of color. And then as it opens, you see a little bit lighter pink on it, and then it starts to fade a little bit more. Some of the other varieties like Invincible Spirit, and that one gets a decent amount of pink, but this is about as pink as it ever gets. It doesn't get quite as dark as this one. And then there's Incredible Blush. That one is a really pale pink, but the most popular varieties are the Invincible series. There's a lot of lime and white ones for that one, a couple of pinks, and then also the Incredible and the Annabelle. Those are all series of those kind. Now, there are 2 new varieties that are going to be coming out. So if you're watching this in the future, in 2025, there's going to be one called Flowerful, and 2026, there's another one called Invincible Stormproof. And those are supposed to be really strong stemmed ones. So I'm assuming that the cut back on those kind are going to be exactly the same as these, but they might have a little bit different instructions. I'll have to test them out once we get them. We don't even have them in stock yet. They're not coming out till next year. So I'm kind of looking forward to those, because those arborescent varieties do tend to flop. They say that they've gotten stronger, and they haven't. So I'm very curious to see how Flowerful and Invincible Stormproof actually do when it rains and when we get strong winds and that type of thing. So now it is time to get to trimming, and I'm not going to do the fussy trimming. I mean, I've done it before where I show you, you count leaf nodes and you do all that kind of stuff. Nope, we are going completely a different route. I'm taking this machine right here, the hedge trimmer, to my hydrangeas, just to show you how easy this can be. So the hedge trimmer is nice because it stops you from thinking about every single snip, and you're kind of forced with what you got. And I can say there are very few instances where people have killed their hydrangeas from trimming it. They can handle quite a bit of abuse. Now, if you trim one of those no trim varieties, you might be sacrificing flowers for the season, but you usually don't kill it. In fact, I've seen some of these Panicle varieties just get chopped right down. Somebody has driven them over with a lawnmower, and they managed to come through from that. The arborescent varieties, same thing. These other ones, like the big leaf ones, they might be a little more temperamental and take a little longer to come back. But even those, if you were to really cut them way back, chances are they're going to make it through. So let me show you what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to go actually to the driveway ones because these are still too pretty for me to trim. We're enjoying them. We have them in the greenhouse, and we do that kind of thing. We keep plants in the greenhouse just so we can keep enjoying them longer and longer. It's kind of one of our crazy habits, and then it puts us behind schedule because we have to then go and put them away later. But anyway, enough about that. Let's get to trimming those. So I guess first I'll do the ones in the driveway, show you how those are done, and then I'll show you some of the arborescens. The general rule for cutting back panicle hydrangeas is usually cut them back by 1/3, and so that's usually pretty easy to kind of gauge how much it is. That usually means just cutting off the flower heads. However, we have cut ours back quite a bit where we've cut them right back to where they're just like a 1-foot mound, and they've done just fine in that situation as well. Now, if you have a variety that you notice the branches have been a little bit weak and they've been a little bit floppy, I would recommend maybe leaving a little bit more and just cutting the flower heads off a little bit, maybe going just below the flower heads and cutting them back that way so that those stems have some strength to them and they have some time to develop, and that might help. And then any of the branches that are kind of flopping down, I would go through with hand pruners, like bypass pruners, and just cut those kind of floppy ones down and leave the upright ones. That usually will help strengthen them and keep your plant more upright. But a lot of the new varieties have such strong stems, it's not a problem at all. So I'm gonna get this baby here. Oops. So gonna just use this hedge trimmer, not gonna think about it. I'm just trying to get a nice mounded shape on these. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go through and cut off the flowers heads so that way you can see what it looks like that way. I'll do that on all 3 of these. And then I'm gonna go in and tighten them up even more just because I know I can, and I want you to see that it's okay to do that as well. So let's see what we can do here. So you can see, very casual technique, and I'm not too worried if this isn't perfectly even because these bloom on all new growth and they tend to grow a lot every single year. So all that new growth is coming in, it's going to naturally fill out and keep a nice shape to it. So I don't have to worry too much about this being exactly perfect. Now, I do have a tendency to go back in and look for, like, this is a kind of a sideways branch. So I might go in and trim that back. Oops. And get that out of there. There's a couple of crossing branches, like I don't know if you can see how this one's pointing downwards. I'll probably cut that one off by hand, but even if I didn't, it would be okay. Like, you're not gonna end up in any kind of trouble or anything if you do it that way. So it's just kind of keep it casual, but look at me, I'm starting to make it less casual. If you just did what I had done with the hedge trimmer, you'd be just fine with this. It's gonna do okay. So don't be stressed about trimming, especially panicle varieties. I've seen these things get mowed down so low and bounce back and do fantastic. So they're very, very forgiving. So do like those. Now I want to show you how to trim the arborescent variety. Those are pretty easy as well. It's very straightforward. So I got that right over here. Let me get that for you. This one here is called Invincible Lace. It's an arborescent variety. And another telltale sign of the arborescent varieties is that down at the base, they tend to have lots of shoots, lots of branches coming out, whereas the other varieties tend to have like a single or a double trunk. You can really tell that they're a woody shrub, whereas this one tends to kind of have a whole bunch of stems, and as those stems grow, they tend to be a bigger and bigger clump. That clump can be divided at different times when it gets big enough, but that's another telltale sign. Now these varieties, you can trim these back really down low, but usually we say between 6 and 18 inches. A lot of people will say if you go like 18 inches, a lot of times those stems will help support the new growth as well. So this is one where you could try different lengths with different plants just to see what you prefer. I've done it both ways. I have noticed that cutting them at about 18 inches does tend to keep them a little bit more upright, but they still sometimes flop on me. Now, the varieties in the Invincible series tend to be a little bit shorter, so they are less likely to flop, so that's kind of nice. But let's go ahead and just give these a hack. And these are, I mean, this one is super easy because that's all you do is this. We're pretty much done. That's it. And whether these are in your yard or whether it's like this, now if you have a hedge of them, you just walk along the hedge. You can tidy it up a little, like I'm noticing I should probably do this side, but super easy. And then in the springtime with any of these plants, you can always go back in and fine tune it if you want, but you don't even have to. So don't stress about these. And just remember, the two varieties that are going to benefit from some trimming are going to be arborescent, which are those ball-shaped ones, Annabelle, Invincible, Incredible. And then the Panicle hydrangeas are the ones that you can trim back by a third or even more. Those are going to be like the Limelights and the Vanilla Strawberries. There's loads of other ones as well. So don't be afraid, just get out there, do it. And if you do have questions about what kind of variety you have, you can always send like a picture or a request to your local nursery. They might be able to help you. This time of year, it gets a little bit harder to identify some of these plants. So if you have it when it's in flower, that's the easiest way for them to know which type of hydrangea you have. So keep that in mind. Good luck, everybody. Hopefully you have a good time doing your trimming. Again, I save my trimming usually for when the plants are completely dormant, kind of like those Limelights that I had just done. This one, I mean, it's pretty much done for the season, so I didn't mind doing it. But I like to do it when it's dormant. So whether it's in the fall or early spring, I just like to do it when the plant generally doesn't have any leaves or the leaves are kind of pulled back. Again, don't forget, do not trim those other varieties that I talked about. The best you can do is cut off any dead stuff and cut off the spent flowers. That's all you need to do, and they'll take care of themselves.